Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now today, as announcement of the government's new energy strategy is just days away, we explore the nuclear option. And a poll of Ukrainians found the most popular foreign leader in the country. We'll bring you the results. Also, is Ukraine dominating our view of foreign affairs to the exclusion of other causes around the world? We'll speak to a former British soldier who's been helping people flee the Taliban. And finally, is Nicola Sturgeon dabbling in military adventurism? All that and more after your morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:35. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. President Zelensky has denied Vladimir Putin's allegations that Ukraine and the US are developing biological weapons. He says he's worried it means Russia might be preparing to launch a chemical attack on his country. The UN Security Council is meeting today at Russia's request to discuss Moscow's claims. Satellite images suggest a large Russian convoy, which had been based northwest of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, has largely dispersed and redeployed. Russian news agencies report their troops have taken out 2 military airfields in the cities of Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk. They also claim Russian-backed separatists have captured the city of Volnovakha, the northern gateway to Mariupol. The government is going to ask Brits to open their homes to refugees fleeing the conflict in Ukraine. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove will unveil details of a sponsored route on Monday. It'll allow Ukrainians without family ties here to come to the UK. Mobile phone company Three has asked Chelsea to remove its logo from the football club's shirts and stadium. It's after Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich was sanctioned by the government over his links to Russian President Putin. UK economic growth bounced back in January as the effects of the Omicron variant began to ease. The Office for National Statistics says GDP grew by 0.8% above pre-pandemic levels. Experts, though, have warned the economy isn't out of the woods yet, with an inflation shock coming. The government has unveiled an £84 million funding package to make trains more reliable in the northwest of England. The money will be used for track improvements, platform extensions and larger depots. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Good morning, it's 9:37 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now first, to the upcoming energy supply strategy, which the Prime Minister this week said would be set out in the coming days. We don't know exactly what it will involve, but judging by this week's Prime Minister's question time, there'll be an emphasis on new nuclear power, an emphasis that now seems to be supported by both major parties. Let's remind ourselves of that lively exchange.
By the way, I think he just committed to supporting, this may be news to some of his party, but he just committed to supporting more nuclear power. Great news. There is more joy in heaven, Mr. Speaker. There is more joy in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, Mr. Speaker, than over 100. I'm delighted. And those were the people, Mr. Speaker, who cancelled our nuclear efforts in the time they were in power. They did completely the wrong thing. I'm delighted to welcome them now into the fold.
Come off it. Labour is pro-nuclear. This Prime Minister can't get a single brick laid of a new nuclear plant. Energy security isn't just about supply, it's also about...
Well, Boris Johnson and Sir Keir Starmer there in a rowdy exchange, but agreeing on the need for new nuclear. But how can this be delivered? And how quickly? Well, joining me now is Dr. Tim Stone, Chairman of the Nuclear Industry Association. Welcome to the programme. First of all, what are you expecting to see in the government's strategy coming over the next coming days?
Good morning, Tom. The government's strategy over the coming days has got to deal with two things. It's got to deal firstly with net zero, but now, as everybody knows, with energy security. If you look at what we have to achieve by 2050, 80%-ish of our current energy comes from fossil. All of that has to be replaced. The 20% that's electricity, most of that has to be replaced too. And so in any solution, there has to be a lot of nuclear, a lot of wind, a lot of solar. It's got to be a balanced system because, as everybody knows, in most walks of life, an excess of anything leads you into either hospital or prison. And we need to have a properly balanced system that delivers the right sort of energy economy for the country, for our grandchildren, because those are the decisions we're taking now. So nuclear has to be a big part of it.
Certainly. How quickly can a nuclear power station be built? Because a lot of the worry is, and I was speaking to some experts yesterday on my programme who said that nuclear seems to take a long time to get done, to get approved, to get funded, to get built. What is the fastest we could build a significant power station in this country?
Right, Tom, so the speed is very interesting, and it's interesting to compare different countries. So the UK has not built nuclear at scale since the 90s, since the 80s, really. If you look at China, even in Abu Dhabi, they can build them relatively quickly. And the most important thing is it's starting now. It's not dithering yet more and thinking about how we might do it. It's just get on with it. Build a fleet, build a fleet, build a fleet. And if we look at where the sequence can go with building large reactors, once you've got one built, you can have other ones follow at a year interval in that sort of scale. With the small reactors, even faster than that. But we have to start. And the challenge now is for the government to produce the trust and confidence for investors, for nuclear technology providers around the world, that the UK is the place to do this. But if Abu Dhabi can build 4 reactors, 2 of them already completed, 2 more pretty close to, having started in 2008, even thinking about it, we can do this too. We did it in the past. The French have done it in the past, the Japanese, the Koreans. But you have to start and you have to put your foot down.
It is remarkable. I was looking at the number of approvals of nuclear power stations. Margaret Thatcher approved 3 nuclear power stations in her time in office, and John Major and Tony Blair proceeded to approve none in the following 20 years. It's pretty extraordinary. But judging by what happened at Prime Minister's Questions this week, is it your view now that the tide has turned and that normal mainstream politics has swung firmly behind nuclear energy?
It's really interesting. That Prime Minister's Questions had me completely on the hop, and many of my colleagues too, but not in terms of logic. From a political point of view, it's quite clear that, with very, very few exceptions, everybody recognises that nuclear has a critical part to play in this. You know, every big reactor is saving billions of cubic metres of gas a year. So I've got no doubt now that between the government and the opposition, there's a clear view that nuclear has to be a critical part of this. The challenge now, though, is the how. It's getting on with it, and it's making those lovely statements, that very well thought through parliamentary political statements, into practical reality.
As is always the challenge. Well, we will watch this issue with interest. For now, Dr. Tim Stone, Chairman of the Nuclear Industry Association, thank you for making time for us here on The Briefing this morning. Now, turning to a poll of Ukrainians, which this week found the most popular foreign leader in the country is none other than British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Yes, these are the results from the US pollster's Signal. It showed the United Kingdom is viewed far more favourably than the European Union, the United States and NATO. Now, for those watching on TV, that graphic might be a little complicated for this time on a Friday morning, so here are the net favourability ratings for each leader polled there. Top, of course, is Zelensky on +79, but then Boris Johnson comes on at +50, numbers he would dream of here in the UK. Joe Biden is next on half Boris's total at +26, followed by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on +23. Chinese President Xi Jinping takes us down into negative territory at -19, and Vladimir Putin is most hated of all at -87. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Chris Lane, the Director of Client Strategies at Signal, the American pollsters who conducted this research. Welcome to the programme, Chris. First of all, I've got and actually thank you for waking up so early as well, coming from across the pond. I've just got one enormous question before we get into the nuts and bolts of this. How on earth do you poll a war zone?
It's very complicated, but the Ukrainian people and the company in Ukraine we partnered with did an amazing job, and we polled 1,000 Americans, 1,000 citizens of the UK, the EU, and of Ukraine. And as you mentioned, President Zelensky has rallied the world. The support for him is overwhelming. And as you mentioned, Prime Minister Johnson would love those poll numbers in the UK. President Biden's in the same boat. The world leaders are viewed very strongly in the Ukraine, and the world has really rallied around with this battle between good and evil.
It's extraordinary that, for example, there's a lot of bad media at the moment in the United Kingdom over the United Kingdom's strategy, for example, towards refugees. The European Union is waiving visas, whereas we have, albeit a speeded up visa process, still paperwork that needs to be done. It seems like that hasn't really hit home in Ukraine. What the Ukrainians seem to care about, judging by this poll, is who has been supporting that country for many months, supplying weaponry, training the army, and offering that solid sanction support.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. I mean, the people of Ukraine are incredibly grateful and love the support of the Western world in this, but they also express that they actually don't want to be a part of NATO. So it's an interesting balance there. And then the people of Ukraine are overwhelmingly optimistic. This is not a PR stunt. Almost a 2-to-1 ratio. People feel like their country is heading in the right direction. And compare that to the rest of the Western world, it's almost the exact opposite. And we're not the ones dealing, as you mentioned, being in a war zone.
It's fascinating to look at that NATO number, because NATO in that poll had a negative rating. I wonder if that is people thinking, because of course the government of Ukraine is very in favour of NATO membership, very in favour of EU membership. I'd hasten to say that probably many people in the United States and the United Kingdom are in favour of Ukraine joining NATO as well. Why do you think it is that the Ukrainians didn't seem to be so supportive of that defensive alliance?
You know, I'm not sure about that, but what I can tell you is the Ukrainian people are so proud of who they are, how they're fighting, how they're standing up to Russia, and the rest of the world is happy to support that cause. Over 65% of all the entities we've talked about are in favor of military support and financial support of Ukraine to fight this battle. When you talk about boots on the ground and military intervention, those numbers become a little more 50-50. But the world has rallied around Ukraine and President Zelensky. President Zelensky's numbers are the type of numbers that Vladimir Putin gets at the ballot box illegitimately, and he's getting them legitimately with his people, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that.
And just finally in this conversation, you of course polled the United States and the United Kingdom as well. Is there broad support for the sanctions that are being brought? Of course, they are going to have an impact in the countries, in our countries as well. It is going to push up that cost of living. But is there support for that?
As of this point, yes. We'll see how that number changes as gas prices continue to rise in both places, and we'll see how that support, hopefully it holds strong. But at this point, the world is rallying behind President Zelensky, behind Ukraine. The Ukrainian people are as optimistic as they could possibly be, and they deserve our praise, and hopefully we will continue to help them fight this battle.
Well, Chris Lane, Director of Client Strategies at the pollsters Signal, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing this morning and for waking up quite so early on the other side of the world.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as war in Europe rightly dominates the news, are we at risk of missing the plight of other people around the world too? Some are now warning that the Ukraine situation, as that intensifies, those still facing great danger and persecution in Afghanistan from the Taliban risk being forgotten. Well, joining me now is Benjamin Slater, chairman of the Nomad Concepts Group, an international development and humanitarian response organisation and a former soldier himself. Welcome to the programme. You have a particular concern about aid spending in Afghanistan and how that may be being diverted. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for having us today. Yes, obviously what's happening in the Ukraine is obviously awful, and I'm glad the world is giving it attention. But we need to also remember there are even recent events also that are causing great problems, poverty, and also refugees and people trying to migrate out of those countries. And one of those, obviously, Afghanistan. And you have obviously Syria, and you've got the problems going on in Gaza as well. These seem to have fallen off the news. And there has been obviously conversations that I've been privy to where funds are being diverted from some of the Africas, the Afghanistans, to the Ukraine crisis. Now, of course, again, I'm glad they're supporting the Ukraine and the issues there, but as I say, they can't really forget what we saw in Afghanistan and what still is a complete tragedy. The fact that that's being kind of forgotten about is a huge concern.
Now, when you speak about money that might be being diverted, is this money that's already been pledged to countries in Africa and Afghanistan that now is moving away, money that was expected? Or I mean, surely there's enough goodwill in the world that there can be new money going to Ukraine?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think what it is that, it is known that funds are being diverted from stuff that's been pledged before. And it's very, very interesting that obviously, we're 6 months after the fall of Afghanistan. OK, we still have 28 million people that are very, very hungry. We've still got this selling of kidneys and children on the border. And as I say, that hasn't gone away, but it's gone away in the news. Afghanistan has been looking, needs about 1.7 billion to prop up for 4 months before the UN, etc., can roll out the actual effective plan to then rebuild the country and its economy. Now, within 7 days, when the Ukraine hit the news, we've seen 13.6 billion rolled out by the US. 720 million's come over from the likes of, the World Bank, and we've had about 900 plus from the EU funds. And then it rolls on, about 140 million from Italy. It's all very, very good, but it just shows a little bit that maybe the world is desensitized a little bit from conflict and tragedy in developing countries. And unfortunately, Ukraine does seem to be the priority right now. But when you stack up the figures and what's needed, even though Ukraine is terrible, when you compare it to the likes of Afghanistan or even Syria, it's very hard to distinguish which one's the priority. But, Afghanistan is still as bad as it was. You couldn't just leave. You couldn't just get in a car and drive. People were hanging off of aeroplanes.
It was terrible. We all remember those scenes. And Benjamin Slater, I'm afraid we've run out of time in this conversation. I wish we could take it a little further, but also I want to thank you for the work that you have done in Afghanistan in getting some very vulnerable people, particularly people who've helped the British over the years, getting them out and away from the Taliban. Thanks for your work and thanks for joining us here on The Briefing this morning. Now, finally today, a no-fly zone over Ukraine should not be ruled out by Western leaders. Well, that's the opinion of Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. There was swift reaction to her comments online, with one member of the Scottish Parliament, Murdo Fraser, tweeting, "Wow, just wow," advocating unilateral nuclear disarmament at the same time as hinting action that could precipitate World War III. Thank goodness these people are nowhere near foreign or defence policy. Well, let's talk to the man who wrote that tweet. Murdo Fraser, MSP for Mid Scotland and Fife, joins me now. Welcome to the programme. It does seem like an extraordinary cognitive dissonance in the mind of the First Minister of Scotland. On the one hand, wanting to rid Scotland of nuclear weapons, and on the other hand, wanting to goad a regime that holds nuclear weapons.
Yes, my colleague Alistair Jack, who's the Secretary of State for Scotland, described Nicola Sturgeon's top comments as deeply irresponsible and naive, and I think he's absolutely right to do so. You have to remember that the SNP are a party who are vehemently anti-nuclear weapons. They've argued for unilateral disarmament over many years. For a long period of time, they were anti-NATO. They changed stance on that a few years ago, so they now are no longer opposed to NATO membership. But it's hard to reconcile that position of being part of NATO, which is a nuclear alliance, with a position where you want to see the nuclear deterrent removed from Scottish shores. At the same time, what was even more extraordinary was you had Nicola Sturgeon suggesting she was open to NATO implementing a no-fly zone in Ukraine. Now, I fully understand the arguments why people in Ukraine have made these calls. I can understand why they want to get protection from NATO countries. But we need to be in no doubt what a major escalation of the conflict that a no-fly zone would mean. It would mean that NATO troops, perhaps British, American fighter jets, coming into direct conflict with Russian jets, that would lead to a war between Russia and NATO, the consequences of which could be unthinkable. And it seems that Nicola Sturgeon, who has no knowledge or experience in international affairs or in military matters, was making off-the-cuff remarks, newspapers, get her face on the cameras as per normal, without any thought of the consequences. It was a deeply irresponsible intervention.
It is worrying when you see these interventions, because we know how much the Kremlin monitors UK media. We know how the Kremlin likes to jump upon words of any figure that seems to be in authority in order to justify some pretty nefarious deeds, or at least justify in their mind. I do wonder, though, if the age of having a nuclear deterrent, if that is coming back into more popularity, looking at Lithuania, looking at Latvia, looking at Estonia, those countries, of course, part of NATO, part of that nuclear alliance, and therefore they haven't been invaded by Mr. Putin when he very much perhaps would like to.
I think anybody looking at this argument only has to look at the history of Ukraine. Ukraine had nuclear weapons as part of the Soviet Union. In 1991, Ukraine unilaterally gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for an undertaking from Russia that Russia would respect its borders and its national sovereignty. Of course, we can only speculate, but I think it's a reasonable assumption to make that if Ukraine had not given up its nuclear deterrent in 1991, it would not today face the invasion that we are currently seeing with all the appalling consequences. So I think the arguments for unilateral nuclear disarmament have taken an enormous setback over the past couple of weeks. And it is extraordinary that the Scottish National Party remain so wedded to the argument that we should remove nuclear weapons. They seem to be utterly out of tune with what's happening in the world.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but Murdo Fraser, thank you for your time this morning. Really important international issue to talk about. Let's hope that the First Minister of Scotland can get back to the day job, which, of course, is domestic. Well, that's it for the briefing this morning. Coming up, it's To The Point with Patrick and Anaya. But first, here's the weather.
Good morning, I'm Helen Roberts. Quite a lot of cloud in the forecast for today, with some outbreaks of rain at times, and it will be a windy day. Having said that, quite mild for this time of year. Now, at the moment, high pressure across the continent is blocking these weather fronts from making much progress. That's the reason for the clouds that we've got at the moment, and in fact for the next few days as well. So this is how it's looking today. Cloudy skies for most, a little brightness first thing for some far eastern parts of the country. But this band of rain will gradually make its way northwards as the day progresses, and there are likely to be some quite heavy bursts of rain along this weather front. following on behind from the southwest as the day goes on, turning to a mixture of sunshine and showers, so a better chance of seeing some brighter spells. But those showers, again, will be on the heavy side at times, perhaps even the odd rumble of thunder mixed in. And those showers continue to push their way north and eastwards as the evening and night wear on. Still quite a lot of cloud in the skies though, so once again it won't be a particularly cold night. Temperatures a good few degrees above average for this time of year and no frost in sight. So that brings us into the start of the weekend, and it will start on a mixture of sunshine and showers, but those showers will be very heavy at times, particularly across the northern half of the UK. Again, the odd rumble of thunder is possible. Meanwhile, further south, those showers tending to fade away, so a better chance of seeing some sunny spells and some drier weather. But that's before this next area of low pressure arrives into the far southwest later in the day on Saturday. Again, temperatures above average, and it will be another fairly breezy day for most. Now, as we head through the rest of the weekend, Sunday is looking like a very wet and windy day for most of us, particularly strong winds in the northwest of the country, but quieter on Monday.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it.